Good evening, a rare visitor to Real Love Guitars workshops, and it's a PRS. And this one's a PRS Hollowbody. Lots of good things about this guitar, but it's a friend of a friend who I was jamming with last weekend, and my friend Dave has been getting on at Owen saying, you need Sam to look at this guitar because it wasn't staying in tune for him. And you know, when you've paid for a quality guitar like a PRS, you expect it to play in tune, or you imagine it would play in tune. So I explained to Owen at the time that there are two critical things involved here, and I drew them up the other day for some strange reason as the yin and yang of tuning stability, and it's badly drawn. And here we had nut, and here we had slack. And if that's 100%, this is 50, and this is 50. So two principal reasons why your guitar doesn't stay in tune. And I go on about this all the time, but some of this I'm going to be talking directly at Owen. Talking directly to you, Owen, about you can get this guitar to stay in tune, but you need to make sure you take care of all the slack in the strings. There are some slight differences in this, in that the guitarist, Owen plays guitar mostly in D standard tuning, so that's a tone below the normal, and as soon as you slack off the strings where we have them right now, they are floppier, which means that when you press them down to make chords or fret them to play a lead or whatever, because they're floppier, you can push them by squeezing, or by your technique you can drive them sharp slightly, or sharp more easily. So that is a kind of an intonation or tuning issue that's important, but it's not as critical as these two parts. So one of the things that I said I would do is I would fit a tusk nut, which I've already done because it was kind of quite difficult to get it exactly the right size and everything, because this, believe it or not, the slot underneath here wasn't very level. Just a small thing you find in great well-made guitars and everything, you sometimes find little issues like that, so I had to kind of work quite hard to get that to sit level. You don't want to keep on leveling downwards, you have to adjust the nut to the slot and stuff like that. Anyway, so we've got a nut, and we're going to make sure that the strings, the slots are wide enough to cope with the strings. Now we're also, after discussion, we're also going up in size. We're going from these are what did I work? These appear to be a 1050 or something like that. I can't remember exactly what they were, but they were. We're going to go a little bit heavier to stabilize, not the tuning as such, but stabilize the ability, or otherwise to squeeze the notes sharp. So if we look at this in the inches department, we're looking at 50 and a half, so 51, something like that, depending on how much we believe this. 51 and a half. This is coming up as 9.5 or 10. So whatever these are, 10 to 50, it's something like that. It's a slightly heavier bottom thing, but what we're going to go is a 12 to 54 on this. So we need to make sure, first of all, that the slots are going to be free running, so we don't get any hang up in here, because remember, 50% is in the nut, so you want the right material, you want the right well prepped slots so that there's no grip, and you also want it set for the best possible first fret action, which is, this is already very close, but we'll use the files just to get it to the perfect first fret action, and make sure the slots are wide enough. And we'll do that, we'll do those final tweaks when we've got the fatter gauge strings on. Another thing I've done in advance is I've just moved this bridge back a little bit, only on the basis that when we discussed intonation, I twanged the intonation and it sounded like there was a struggle to get the G into intonation, and as you can see, it's already at the back of the bridge. So what I did was I pushed the whole bridge backwards a tiny little bit using the little hex key there, so slack off the strings, wind it out a little bit by tightening those, and it basically pushes against the post and pushes the whole bridge back a tiny bit. I've probably moved back, I don't know if you can see there, you can probably see the original mark left by the thing, so I've probably gone back a mil or two, but that gives me either opportunity. If that was short anyway, then that would probably be, sorry, that one will probably be now in the correct place, but we can adjust them. But we've given ourselves a couple more mil to get the intonation right, and at the same time I've also lowered the action because it was quite high, so now we've gone down to my typical target action that you should be able to get on a guitar of this quality. Now I can already hear some slap and some fret buzz, so in doing that it was important to, we're going to have to level it to make sure that it plays with the action chosen. And maybe at some point here people will say, oh, but PRSs are all, you know, the frets are done in a certain way or whatever. That's true, but what I do know is they're not leveled, they won't be leveled under tension in the way this method does. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, having adjusted those things, I'm just going to double check the amount of relief. Now this will change slightly as we put on heavier strings, but for now we can level with it on. The amount of change it will make will not be so substantial that it completely changes. It will put a little bit more pressure on, but the only alternative is to kind of spend two sets of strings to do it for the tiny bit of difference there is. So we're now in D standard. I've marked up the frets ready. We've got the correct amount of relief, which I've got listed in my head as a tiny bit more than none, and that's a really important part of the equation. This is something else I wanted to let Owen know about, because it's something, let's see, I think, no, that's not the right one. I think we'll have an adjuster in here that suits the, what's this one say? Yeah, right. Mini GS Mini truss rod. Now I had myself a little truss rod adjuster, and I've got a Fender one. I've got a Gibson one here, but that's probably the wrong one. So either I'll find one. I was hoping there might be one in the. That's going to be too big, I think. Hoping there's going to be one in the box, but we don't have one. So what I'm going to do is some leveling in a short while. But what I also want to just do is I want to demonstrate or discuss the business of why will I need something else for this? Really, we need the original PRS tool, which I haven't got. That's how few of them I get through here. So there's the Gibson one, which is, you know, that kind of wrench, this right-angled thing. Sometimes you can use a socket of the correct size, but we won't be able to get that in there with anything, unfortunately. Even with a bar on, it's incorrect. Okay, so my demonstration of adjusting the truss rod is going to have to either be done on a different guitar. As it happens, it's the right amount of relief in here already. But would have had to wait a couple more days to acquire one of these, which is a pain. Let's just have a quick look in the world of, because I guess if it's not in the box, Owen, I guess you don't have one, which you ideally will want one, because it's a sort of thing I'd like to be able to explain. Let's go to hammers, and probably ought to do it on the other camera, because I don't know if I'm geared up on this one. Where's Amazon? Oh my, where's Amazon? I can't even see it. This is the old Hawaii. I got eBay, I got Amazon, right. It may be already still logged in. Would be quite handy. Continue shopping. Oh, come on, can I sign up? Hello. It shows anything I've bought. It says items you've viewed. Okay. I don't want all of that today. It says buy again. Where's the search option? Oh my lord. I don't want that. Don't want that. I don't want this. Where the hell has searching gone? What have you done, Amazon? This is a terrible interface. There is no search bar, or there's no access to my account details. So I've used this before. Going down the page, it shows things I've bought, but it isn't showing me any sort of sign in option. Oh boy, oh boy. So I think I'm near, well, I'm not even near the bottom. In fact, I never get to the bottom. That's pretty handy. Okay, so that's just terrible. I actually have there's no menus or anything. Can I? No, I don't want to look at it. This is terrible. I don't know if you can see this from there. So look, there I am at the home page of Amazon on the Huawei phone. Deals for you, yada yada yada. But there's no bar where I can. There's nothing I can drag down to. There's no. There's no. See all deals. I don't want to see deals. I want to search for something. So there's a whole bunch of stuff pushed at me. And there's even buy again, so this recognises things I've bought. But view your browsing history. Well, that's great. So I can look at things I've looked for. When did I look at a Dell gaming computer? That's not true. So anyway, I got no. You can't do anything in the mobile application. You can't sign up for it. So I'm going to have to stop this camera, or I'm going to need to have a quick look. Bear with me. Caught me on the hop. £8 from Music Lily, but that will do. Got to have one for the workshop. I think, in fact, out of interest, the last one I did, I think, had easier access, so I didn't have to worry. I used a socket. But this one definitely needs the standard PRS wrench. So ordered, and it will be here on Monday, so that's fine. How the hell did that stay on there? How did I get that to stick there? Wow, marvellous. Miracle of magnets. Anyway, sorry about that. So let us go back and do what we're doing, because the relief at the moment is fine. So let us get us up to pitch. Not pitch. Okay, so going to do fret leveling at that loading, which is a lot slacker than it would be if it was at standard tuning. So we'll just run over and see what we've got to make sure we can get as good a as fret buzz and fret slap free an action as possible. So like I say, what I'll do then is at the end of this I'll put on the new strings, and then we'll make the final adjustment to the action on Monday. So I'll drop you a message, Owen, so you'll know when a good time to collect is. So the idea of this is to take care of any uneven frets, so that you get a low action. The low action this guitar should easily cope with, but also you get it without fret slap and fret buzz at the chosen action. So what's great about the method is that when we do the leveling, what I call track by track, so I'm going to level by the E track, then the B track, and thin strips effectively, using my legendary banana tool, what we'll see, or what it tells us very quickly, is whether the neck is straight or whether it has any sort of bunching or high and low spots, which is always the interesting thing to pick up. And so even where you'd think that everything had been beautifully leveled in the past, what this shows up is that it isn't as level as it likes to think. So I've got itchy nose. So if I point at the thing as we go along, I don't know how well we can, that's not too bad. Okay, so we can see very little leveling, so it's just a few passes, so we can just cut the tops of the frets very slightly. So we've got cutting, cutting, low. Okay, the edge is low, 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 barely cutting at all. Next to it, cutting, cutting. So straight away, you know, this is, I'm sorry about this, I've only got a certain number of hands, so I'm going to mark off what we've got. So we've got a low spot right there. Those 3 frets are low, so that's a dip. Then we go normal cutting, if you like, normal. I wouldn't say high, but it'll be high if you find one that's really cut heavily. So I call that normal, normal, low, 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 normal, normal, lowish, 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 low. Okay, so now we've got a second spot of what I would call a trough, if you like. Let's move that along to there. It's a bit wider than that actually, but let's just stick it in there for now. Okay, so we've got a low, and then we're cutting again. We've got a low at the edge, but it's okay after that. Okay, 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 a bit low, low at the end. So we've got a final couple of low spots at the end. So the interesting thing about this is, let's do this. So if we get down on it, sort of, there's our lows, and there's our lows. Not very easy to see, but there we go. So there's a quick map of the fretboard on this PRS under load with detuning, D-standard tuning strings of this gauge. The compression and bunching, whatever was leveled in the factory or at PRS, it's showing up that there's a low, a valley you might call it here, a valley there, and a valley at the end, in that sort of proportion. Now, what would I expect to find as a result of that? Well, what you often find, and I'm not sure if we'll hear it directly just yet, but what you often find, or you expect to find, is when a string is played here, fretted here, it's been fretted in a little dip, and consequently at a low overall action, which is what we've set, fretting in a dip tends to make the next fret effectively high, the next couple of frets. So you can, if the action's very low, which we're aiming for, when you have a dip in the neck like this, you tend to be fretting in the dip, and it makes the following frets effectively or relatively high. So we might think we might just hear a little bit of zzz, zzz when we're fretting here equally, and I would suggest here we might hear it directly. So if I'm going to predict anything, and there's quite a few low frets, but let's do a sort of try and make 1 or 2 predictions so we can see it proven or shown in reality. So there's the 12th fret is one. So we got the dips, if we write them up here, are 3, 4, 5, 4, 5. Then we've got let's call it 9, 10, 11, 12. 9, 10, 11, 12. And 12 kind of especially seems low. It's not even touched at all. And then we've got 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 and 22. But since they're right at the end, they won't, you won't hear anything there because they won't get in the way of anything. So those are the 3 valleys in this neck on the high E side. And like I say, often it may just be that that doesn't reveal itself in any problems in playing. But where it is low, you can find that you get a choke or a buzz on that point. But also, the important bit is notes bent when their starting point is in a dip, they will choke out quicker as they come across the board. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have bends on the 12th and the 13th, or sorry, 11th, 10th, 11th, 12th. I wouldn't be surprised if they sound like they are choking on bends. Where did my finger? Right. So let's just have a quick listen of that tiny bit of leveling, what you can see because I haven't got my mirror. There you go. Hear it squelching? That's the dip. That's the effect of being in the dip. So I can really tell that's the lowest one on the board is the 12th, and you can hear it. Clean, dip. And what we tend to find now is if we bend this, it's actually not too bad. But you can hear in bending, that dip is also helping to create a zing as we go across. So what I'm going to do is, the important thing now is we've got two sort of areas to worry about. We've got the straight notes on this fretboard, and as you heard, the 12th, even at this action, which is my target normal low action, you absolutely should be able to play with this action on a PRS. But at that chosen action, you can hear that that dip is causing the 12th fret to buzz, or to squelch, I call it, without any bendings or anything going on. So just playing it, we get a less than ideal note there. So the only way you're going to deal with this is to come back to the fingerboard, and we have to basically bring down the frets on either side of that what do I call it, valley. We have to kind of bring them down a little bit until the differential, or the difference between the one at the bottom of the valley and the ones further up the valley aren't so great. Because while they are great, the one after the ditch acts as a high fret, and that is what is always your constraining thing on a fretboard. It's the low frets that really do you in. The high frets, in a sense, are easier because you kind of can take off just that high bit without doing much all round it. The low frets require you to bring the surroundings. That's okay. Now you hear how that's cleaned up, so we've achieved it, right? Sorry. Not bad. So I'm going to do a tiny bit more there, but that you can hear in the space of doing this and following that logic carefully and unhysterically. What we've done is we've now made these frets level enough to play with the chosen action. And like I said, you part of you would say, oh, that should have played before we even got to there. That's still being untouched, by the way. It's still below, still low enough that it's not even being touched by the banana tool, but we've leveled around it enough so that with the combination of bringing the others down and the basic minimum playing action, that it means that dip is now no longer affecting it and stopping it play at this action. If you lowered the action anymore, it would come back into being a problem, because there we go, freed up for the chosen action. Now I'm going to reuse the same calibration for the B track because I can't, you don't have enough space either side to calibrate them all individually. So we have to use either one side of it or the other twice. So I tend to use the high side and use the first calibration as the for the first two tracks. Now quite often what we find is after a little bit of leveling, we sort of probably expect to see a confirmation of what we had before, but sometimes it changes. So when we go back and look at it and we say, what did we have before? Well, let's look at the cutting on the second track, or the B track. Sorry, I'll try and keep still here. Okay, cutting okay, okay, a bit low. So we had 3 was low, yeah, 4 is still low, can you see that? Now 4 was low before, but we just got it back into play by leveling. But 4 here is low, which ties in exactly with that. 5 is a bit low, but it's been caught now already, which is fine. 6 is running, 7 is good, 8 is good, 9 is a little bit lower, 10 is, actually I can't see it from this angle, let's get a good angle on it. 10 is, 9 is barely cutting, 10's cutting, 11's cutting just about, 12 is not cutting at all really, oh it's just touching, 13 a tiny bit missing, so 12 and 13 could do with a bit more, and then I don't know if you can see, but onwards that looks about okay. So we'll do a little bit more on 12, 10, 11 and 12. So you can see that what we discovered on the first pass on the high E track is again borne out as we move to the B track. And so what I'm doing is I'm just thinking about this 10, 11, 12 area here, and I'm just trying to help bring the surrounds down a little bit so that those parts of the fingerboard are the difference in height between the ones in the valleys and the hills is not so great, and that way we won't get any buzzing and choking. Notice how that zzz is gone from the bends already, so that's good. So now I'm feeling fairly confident about all of this. So, and having done this thousands of times already, I really do know how this thing works, and I do have confidence in it, obviously. Now this has changed. Now we need to slightly tighten the curve a bit, so add a bit more bending to the banana tool, which is just a bit more needed. So what we're seeing is that the relief curve has changed by the time we get to the G, very slightly. So now I'm back on, now it's matching. So I've basically tightened the curve of the rod a little bit to match the actual relief curve in this part of the neck. I'm going to do the same thing again. Now the G track, which I'm now doing, is very critical to any chokes on bends. Any unevenness along the length of this fingerboard, fretboard, on the G track, when you're playing with a low action, will be the place where a low action will run into problems if there are any significant differences in height in the frets on the G track. And there will be a problem if there are any differences in height, but also if you're playing in a dip as you're doing the bending, as we've already talked about. You play from in a ditch and you run into what's the word, differences in height on the frets, then the two things create a choke out on the bends. It's the only note and that whole thing now that, oh Jesus, I hate those spikes. Owen, when I get very telly-offy, I hate cut short spikes that cut people like me, and I hate tied knots in the thing. You don't need them. That's important for what I was talking to you about, tuning stability. You don't need those little tied knots. They just make it harder for people like me and you yourself next time. So I'm just going to go back to this end of the neck, and when I say this end, I'm putting, if anything, a little pressure on this end as I level, and that's just kind of doing a little bit more work at this end than the other end, although it's still doing some work at this end, but not as much. So that, I can tell by experience, that will be fine for that track. now we recalibrate for the wound strings. Now the interesting part now is you move over to the wound strings using this process. So if you think about this, we have what's when we move from the planes to the wounds, my focus changes from what I call fret buzz, which is usually caused by individual high or low frets, and in this case we were focusing on fret buzz caused by particularly a low 12th fret, which now you can hear is mostly taken care of. But when we get over to the wound strings, my attention focuses changes to focus on what I call fret slap, which is imagine thinking about fret buzz where you're looking at individual frets and their relationship to the frets immediately other sides. If you think about fret slap as zooming out a bit from the whole thing and thinking about the whole undulation of the fingerboard as a whole, so when you have a wound thicker string spinning, it moves much more in its circle that it describes, and the midpoint more than most, so the critical area for fret slap is around here. But when you have fret slap, you tend to hear a bit of all the way up, but you can hear it's increasing here anyway, as predicted. And the reason it's increasing is even though the center of movement has moved up here, the reason it's increased here is because we're fretting in a ditch. Do you remember? So 10, 11, 12 are down in a hole. But I'm not thinking about individual frets, I'm thinking about this group. So if you like, there's a high spot, there's a low spot here, and then there's a high spot that we know immediately afterwards about here. So when I'm fretting here, the little bit of will be caused by it rattling around about here, and it will be the movement of the string around the next peak or the next hill in the sequence. So what I'm trying to do, the only thing I can do to improve that is to do what this method of leveling does really well, and if I draw it up as yet another explanation, your neck under load, as you probably guessed from my description, looks like that. All right, it's got some valleys, as you can see, and though we know what effect they have, we've heard it and we've seen me alleviate it. When we fret in here, this chokes out, so you've seen me address kind of this area here. So we've leveled the whole thing, but I've focused on this, so I've taken down these a little bit, and obviously along here as well, but focused on this part here, and I've brought these down to kind of bottom out a bit and even out this one, right? It's not a very good drawing, but you get what I'm saying. Now we're thinking about it more in terms of an overall topography, and it's a very bad drawing, but so we know we've got those valleys still, and we know that when we're fretting here, we're fretting anywhere along here, this hill here and this hill, or any hill, wherever we fret, any hill in front of the fretting point can be a potential problem that creates what I call fret slap, which is that sound that actually, as you can see, this can accompany almost every single note along the way, and it gets worse if we think that this is the 12th fret trench in the bottom of our ocean. We've got a high spot here which is liable to catch our spinning string, even more so when we're fretting it right down in this trench, because it has to come upwards past this hill, so it's going to slap straight away, and that's why we can literally hear it getting worse as we come up to the 12th fret. So you think, well, what the hell are you going to do about it? Well, the interesting thing is, as you saw, and this is something I only learned over the years, let's say I take 3 sample points of this neck, right, with my brass whatchamacallums, right, and they're randomly wherever it falls, okay, and you can see that, or you've seen you can figure it out, that when I bend the truss rod, the banana, I bend it between these 3 points, very badly drawn, okay, but I've got blood coming out from that damn string spike. But you can see that in a way I'm trying to draw a smoother curve than this slightly real ragged wobbly curve. And so what you end up with, if I just redraw this so that we looks a little bit more credible, we have, you know, a kind of wobbly reality versus a sort of an idealized curve, and that's a better view. You can see that one is idealized and one is real. And so what we do, thinking about fret slap, is as we bring down this curve, thinking about the whole fingerboard rather than, you know, concentrating on one area now. What I'm going to do is, you may see, if I bring this down, I'm going to tame the top of that hill, I'm going to tame the top of that hill, I'm going to tame the top of that hill, and so on, right, as I bring it down. That, amazingly, ends up by creating a little bit more space. So as you can see, if I fret there, it's not quite as tall, getting in the way. If I fret there, that isn't still as tall, and it allows me more rotation of the string. So wherever I fret, this sort of global or higher level taming of the topography seems to really help. So that's what it's all about. And I, you know, like I said, I didn't start out knowing this. I sort of observed it over the years, and, you know, found it seemed capable of doing that, and I had to kind of work out in my head why. So and it seems to be a game of two halves. In the first half, we're focusing mainly on the individual high frets, but obviously we're still, if we've got an individually high fret or an individually low one, we've still got to work on that, like we do here on all of these strings, whether plain or wound. We've still got this problem of the low 12th, which will make the next one play rattly, because it makes the next one effectively high, or relatively high compared to the 12th. So we're taking care of that, but also thinking about this picture of the curve, the good curve on the wobbly curve. And the wobbly curve is because the neck is under compression, and wood never seems to curve when it's compressed and it's loaded. It never curves perfectly smoothly because it's organic, and so that's really interesting. So I've calibrated for the D track, and so now I move the D string and get ready to do that. Now this is where I change kind of very slightly, and this is where this truss rod in particular, this type, comes in really handy, because from this point onwards I'm almost consciously thinking less about pressing down and taking attacking an individual fret. I may focus on more on one end of the board than the other, but to begin with I'm sort of thinking about the lightest touch as possible, because what I don't want to do is bend this flat. I want this to come down on top of all of those bumps together if I can, and I'm going about an inch side to side. You could probably find a slightly longer one if you want an overhang, or, you know, I've got a longer one for bass guitars and stuff, but this has always seemed to be a pretty good one for the guitar length. And so I'm working this up and down and backwards and forwards, side to side, a little bit within this track. And what I'm doing it with in my mind is I'm paying attention, I'm thinking about imposing the smooth curve of this rod onto the wobbly curve, the imperfect curve of the neck, and the effectiveness of that then is only measured in the reduction in the amount of slap. Now, why would we expect to get a bit? That's the slap coming back in. And why is that? Well, we know that 10, 11 and 12 are in a ditch, the biggest ditch on the neck, the biggest valley. So, even though I could just keep on doing the whole lot, this is where I tend to allow myself to use a little bit of focus, as I call it, on a particular area, because we know 10, 11 and 12 is a particular problem. At this chosen action, it's still slapping a little bit. So now I'm going to continue doing this. Those eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that I've turned the rod around. I just do that a force of habit in case it's even a slightly biased one way versus the other. And what I'm doing is I'm just bringing this rod over and concentrating a little bit more heavily on the 12th fret where the problem is. Now that's actually cutting quite well at this point, and so and in fact it's cutting where the 12th on this side is barely cutting, but I want to cut it here because the reason I'm cutting it at this point on the board, and I didn't have to on that point, is that these strings don't spin pound for pound as much. The wound ones start to, so we'll probably take a little bit more off the problem frets, or any of the problem frets on the bass side of the neck. Fine. That's pretty good. Right, so now we're going to recalibrate for the A, and we're going to find more slap on the A because it's a fatter string and it's going to spin more. So we calibrate for the A, and now this needs to back off because now that would be over curved. It's interesting how between two tracks there's a difference. Okay, that feels like it's just about good. Only a small adjustment, and again, it's by feel. You really can't describe how much adjustment you do. You have to practice, and you can tell when you're right because all three of these points touch the bar at the same time. So now I'm working on the fatter string track now, the A, and I know where my general patterns of low spots are, so I'm going to probably focus around this area because that's the most problematic area. But I want to, I'm kind of holding it so that it does all areas on the neck, because I still want to tame the tops of all of the hills at the same time. And I want to do it in such a way that I don't really crush the U-channel truss rod into any flatter profile. Because if you have a very flexible one, you can bend it really hard and then it maps itself onto, the existing shape. Actually, it's not so bad if it does, to be honest. I think if you've got a high spot here and a high spot there, the truth is you don't want to bend it into the middle so it goes over the high spot, down into the low spot, and back up the high. You really do want it to sit on the high spots and bring them down without touching. And so the danger of a very flexible one is, providing the points of difference are far enough apart, you can accidentally press it into the valley, which you don't want to do. Anyway, so that's why the U-channel became my truss rod of choice, because it's inherently stiffer. Tiny bit there on the 12th and 13th. Tiny bit there on the, what's that, 15th, 17th, on the 18th. So 18th and 13th, so we're a little bit more up there to do. So you hear that I can really accurately home in on the problem areas. Now when I say problem areas, I mean problem for this chosen action, right? So the point is you only ever need the guitar frets to conform or to behave with the action you've chosen. Obviously within certain practical limitations, you can't have 0 millimeters and expect it to play. You would have to have sort of mathematically laser leveled fret or whatever. But we're aiming for a target low action that sits within a workable range for almost every kind of electric guitar. And so we're just making this action that we've chosen play, or making these frets conform to that action. Fine. Now we go to calibrate for the low E, and that will be our final track to level. And then, so coming full back, you can see that we've got rid of choked out notes, so we can't hear them anymore. Not by raising the action back up, we've done it by taming the frets. We've come across the board, anticipated the effect of a cluster of low frets around here, and some more around here, and the one up here as well. And we've leveled this half of the neck. We've made sure that, we leveled in the G track to make sure that bends across from the high E, including those that begin in what is still a bit of a dip. We haven't changed the shape of the wood underneath. We've leveled out the discrepancy till it plays nicely, but we remember that when we bend from inside a dip, like here, we are bending uphill across the radius, and in doing so, the string anchors low down here, lower down here, and it's going to be any slight high areas in the G track are going to affect those bends. They affect them anyway, even if you're not starting in a valley, but if you do start in a valley, then you're going to run into those, any slight unevenness here is going to affect it even greater. So we level the G track knowing that we're bending out of a valley still. We haven't completely flattened it, we just made it play at this side. So we know we're bending out of a valley here up into this area. We need it to be very even. We've leveled that, and then we come across into the wound strings that spin more, and then we're thinking about more of the bigger picture, which we know is across the whole board, but really we can hear the effects are showing themselves where we've got the biggest kind of general valley, and so that the high spot before it is liable to get caught here. The high spot after this valley is always going to cause problems, because if we fret in there, we're going to hit it like a single low fret, causing the problem, but it's also going to cause in the strings fretted notes outside of that are going to also ground out on those high spots. So we are thinking about the whole topography, if you like, of the neck. So that's still good for calibration. And so just as a reminder, we go up to here. We want to improve that using this amazing banana, super reliable banana method. Now sometimes, I'll tell you this, a caveat in advance, sometimes you find a situation where you can't improve it, and occasionally you have to just compromise a little bit on your playing action on that side of the strings. So but interestingly, I thought I'd got to that place yesterday with Luther's Partscaster Telecaster, and I was actually quite surprised, because something was suddenly, there was something unusual happening. And what was unusual is I was doing this, I was leveling, and I'm usually pretty confident that some careful leveling from that higher sort of fret slap leveling perspective pretty much always tames the slap. But it wasn't on this guitar yesterday, and so when something isn't going the way it normally goes, you stop and you think, what's happening that's different? And by chance I thought to look at the pickups, or not by chance, I knew they were set very high. And it turns out that somehow the pickups were nearly touching the strings, and something about when I was fretting the strings and the string was spinning here, something about the pickups was holding it lower than it would normally spin. And for some reason it was therefore coming closer into contact, and it was still clattering against the frets. I took the pickups down away from the strings, and lo and behold, it alleviated that slap like it should have done. Now, a little bit down there, because we had a low spot at 3, 4 and 5. C5 is pretty good. 6, 7, okay. 8 a little bit. 9 into a hole. 9, 10. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, a little bit more to go. So at that point I'm saying, okay, we are at an action of 1.5 on this last fret, which is where I aim to go to. What I noticed is, just out of interest, I noticed that the pickup is quite close to the strings here. So let's just follow yesterday's lead and take this down a bit and see, just for fun, if it makes any difference at all. Honestly, I wouldn't expect it to in this case round. Let's see. No. Now we've got more spin, because this is a much slacker string. So we've got more spin because of this much slacker string. So we may find that on a dropped D, standard D tuning, we may find that that has an effect on whether we can get down to that 1.5 final fret. Because I do so rarely do guitars in a standard D standard tuning and similar kinds of things, and also relatively rarely do short scale guitars, which have a similar effect on the strings. But let's just see if a little bit of careful taming the hills and the valleys. Let's just see if we can't improve that a little bit before we have to consider any alterations. So I'm just kind of working right to the edge of these frets, and conscious that the top end here is the sensitive, tends to be the most sensitive area. So there we are. That now, from instinct, that feels about where I'd like to be with leveling on these frets on this side of the neck. So I'm thinking, if this improves it, then we'll call that a win. But if it doesn't, I'm going to do a little bit more on there because the first half has improved. Let's just do that little, what we know is the lowest spot on the board. So we're having to do it a little bit more than normal because of the extra slackness of the strings, especially all of them, but especially the wound ones. So I'm kind of concentrating now on the space from 12th to 15th and just giving that a little bit of a working over. And again, just on this spot alone, I'm happy with that. Don't want to go any further, and this will be my last offer. So that's just, experience says that's a good point to stop. And if we need to make any adjustments after that, we'll go up very slightly. It's not bad. I'm happy with that. Technique as well comes into it on strings when they are loose like this. And actually it's an interesting one because when Kevin came around to get his guitar the other day at the Mexican, made in Mexico Strat, I did a standard Mexico Strat style setup on his guitar. When he came, he played it, and it seemed buzzy all of a sudden, and so that I was a bit. I never liked that. I think, have I? My first port of call is, have I not done it well enough? And then I did something I should always do is when that happens is say, can you give me the guitar? Let me have a feel. And so I played it and played all the notes without any buzz, and gave it back to Kevin, and he played it, and there was that same buzz came back into all the notes. So it put me in an interesting kind of position because it was quite right to say at that point, okay, I think what we're seeing here is a technique thing, and I know that he's not an experienced player, not an experienced player. And I didn't want to cause any offence by saying, no, my leveling's fine, but your technique needs work. But actually, because I was able to demonstrate that it wasn't happening when I played it, it felt actually that it was the right thing to do in service of him, because it's nothing more important than, if I had not said it because I didn't want to hurt his feelings or risk an uncomfortable moment, then the chances are the disservice I would have done, because he could easily have gone saying to himself, I paid to have it set up and listen to it, it's buzzing and I'm annoyed, and I'm going to take it somewhere else and try that cycle again. And actually what I realized I'd done is taken I had the courage to say, actually, it is a technique thing, and I think you need to keep in mind that you heard me then just play it and it didn't make any noise like that. So what I recommend is you keep that in mind and practice playing it so in such a way that you don't get those buzzes. I think that's a really important target that I couldn't have put in front of him had I not been taking the risk of being honest about it, which is funny because you don't want to, you know, I notice how quickly I want to blame myself. Oh, I've done it wrong, or I haven't leveled it correctly. So yeah, there are times when it can be just a technique thing, and it's sometimes I've heard it in the past where it ends up you hear the luthier or the tech maybe making excuses for their not, you know, taming the neck well enough or whatever, but actually, you know, if you can, that ability, because Kev came to my house to pick it up, I was able to play it there and then in front of him, and that did as much for my experience stroke confidence as it did for his learning, which was, it was one, you know, it made me in future much more likely to trust my process and say, no, I remember that time when Kev came round and it sounded like it was buzzing, but then when I played it, it wasn't. Because quite often, not quite often, occasionally I'll have somebody where I do the work, send it back, and they go, no, it's still buzzing, and it's very, very difficult to say at a distance, oh, you know, it may well be doing that because of your technique. It's a horrible sort of line to use, although it's you know, it can be entirely correct as my story kind of goes. But anyway, so now what I'm doing is I'm re-crowning the frets. So the idea is to just round off any flat edges. So the file, this crowning file, sort of rounds them off and brings the I'll show you as a quick drawing. This is for Owen's benefit, because lots of you folks will have seen this. This is me sizing up the nut and working out how much to take off and stuff. But when we level frets, we take the fret like so, and then typically when we level it, we come along and swipe a bit off the top to level it, and it ends up being flat, relatively speaking. And what happens is, if we don't address it, if the bridge is down this way, what happens is that if we leave a flat spot, it's exaggerated, but what happens is that the intonation point moves to the front edge, or the bridge word edge of the fret, which is, you know, effectively X amount off the center point of the fret, which we don't want to have happen. It's a very small amount in reality, but you know, occasionally you might get a millimetre. At worst case, you may find if somebody's leveled the frets and there's a flat spot nearly 2 mils across, which is rare, but you know, that's quite a big distance to move the intonation point on a single note. So what we're aiming to do when we re-crown something is we work with the material that's available in the material that's left, if you see what I mean. And the aim is to re-round it so that the intonation point goes back to the middle, and then we take off the excess material, and so that comes back to the middle, and we've gone back to an arch form or an arch shape by rounding off that unnecessary material, as you saw. And that's what the file's good at, because the file is a sort of concave file that sits on top, kind of like that. But what it doesn't do is it's shaped such that it doesn't, it's designed that it doesn't cut the top until you go down too far. So it starts with, by definition, it cuts the sticking out edges first. And the idea is to stop before the file cuts the top. And that's what I'm doing here. And it's a great tool actually. So you use the concave file, and I tend to keep a little wire brush to declog it of any marker pen. But we run it along the top, and the marker pen gives me a guide so I can stop filing once. So as long as I've rounded off the sides and I can see that as they shine up, but I stop before it removes the marker pen in the center of the fret, which is, it's never a very good view of this job. So there's one I haven't done next to the ones I have. So done, not done. So as I go across, you might see a little line. You can probably see there, which is not that bad a view, but you can probably see that there's a kind of slightly uneven set of, we've leveled at different amounts, but my aim will be to kind of level where or to round off where I've done quite a bit of leveling, so in the middle and over on the base side, and then leave the other side alone because it was bare amount. So that's as little as I can do, and I move it down to the next one, and I go like so. So you can see, as I very lightly do it, you can see the shine of that line, and that's pretty even. So I run up and down a few times, and as you can see that it gets thinner, the black remaining marker pen gets thinner, so I concentrate on the ends a bit more, and that one is good. That's about as thin as I can get it down that end, and a little bit more on this end, and then I stop and move on. So that leaves the frets pretty much relatively level in relation to each other, because as long as I haven't worked on the top of it to any degree, and occasionally you just touch it, but as long as it's not any major amount of leveling on top, then you've preserved the relative levelness that you achieved in the fret leveling. And so after this, the job is to mask off the fretboard and get ready to sand out these re-crowned frets. The bridge, having taken the bridge off, the bridge is now susceptible to changing its action, but the great thing about this is that even if the posts do wind up and down to where I don't want them, I can always just screwdriver turn the posts to the correct playing action, and the neck will conform with that playing action. That's what's great about this method, is we have leveled the frets in such a way that so long as we use as long as we set the action back to where we had it, it'll play, the frets will play at that chosen action. Obviously if we go below that, we know there's still some residual unevenness because we haven't taken it all out mathematically, we've just taken out what was interfering with play, basically. For the sake of preserving fret metal, that's what I like to do, and actually that's one of the reasons why this method is more economical of fret metal than any other leveling method, because here, as you've heard throughout me doing this, I stop when the fret is playing at the action I've chosen, and I don't go any further below that. But of course the downside is it doesn't let you have any further downward height adjustment without being pretty confident running into possibly buzzers and chokes. But the idea with this is that you take my word for it that a 1.5 low E last fret action going across to 1.25 high E last fret action, they are about as low as you're ever really going to comfortably get with this kind of guitar. I always point out that occasionally there are one or two types of guitars that I've got lower actions out of. One type I've found in the past, SGs tend to be very, because of the way the neck sits outside the body, the neck seems to bend very reliably as one, as opposed to bolted or glued necks, which clearly have a sort of congested point where the joint is made. It stiffens up, obviously, but with an SG, all the neck that matters, if you like, is there's a tenon inside the body, but all the truss rod part of the neck, the truss rod affected part of the neck, is all outside of the body. So the first thing that I've noticed that allows the neck to bend as a single piece much more easily than bolt-on, or particularly kind of glued joints like the Les Paul. So that's a plus, and Yeah, and for some reason that seems to add up to, I can often get a millimeter playing action on the low E and the high E. Just something to do with the smoothness, and the less, there being less of a sort of cluster of frets or a hump around the join. So that seems to be a pretty good word of thumb. Of course, the other kind of neck that I've noticed being absolutely brilliant and capable of a millimeter playing action at the last fret was the carbon fibre neck on the Emerald guitar, acoustic guitar, that I looked at and worked on a little bit. And as you can tell, I didn't have to work too much on that one. But yeah, carbon fibre, it appeared to be the most uniformly, smoothly curved neck of any guitar that I'd had through. So, there was definitely a big plus for the carbon fibre construction. And it did, what for me, it also added to my evidence to my working hypothesis that, under compression and loading, the wood behaves in a bunching way, which is what gives us these ups and downs, and which is what causes us the various chokings and slappings that we get. So anyway, that's all good stuff in experience, but it comes from thousands of these setups using this method. And I think I mentioned in the last video, it was great to be featured in, I think it's John's podcast called The Next Project, and to have him do I thought very decent and thorough kind of review of this method. And he was also very excited to think of improvements to it, which is absolutely fine. I think that's great when people take something, figure out or understand how it works, and then think of ways it could be improved. Maybe it can't, but there's nothing better than setting out to have a go to see if it can be improved, and that's what humans do. So it was really nice to be featured in that. But over 9 or so years of using this method, it's been dependable, and actually it's kept me in business. People come back, partly I think a mix of, as far as they tell me, my setup, the kind of accuracy or the precision of the action, or the nice low actions they get, the playability improvements they get, but also my kind of way of doing customer service and keeping people informed about what's going on, including videos wherever possible. Occasionally, like yesterday, I just wasn't feeling up to being on camera for a couple of hours, so I just wimped out and only recorded a small part of the thing. But most of the time, part of the customer service is, doing a. Am I still running? 56. Yeah, It's most of the time I'm up for it. So what I'm just going to do is I'll just getting my board full of pre-cut thin pieces of this stuff, masking tape, and I'm going to use those to finish off masking the neck, and then I'll go off camera to do the polishing, sanding and polishing, because it gives me a chance to have a drink, to listen to something on the radio, YouTube or something, and then come back when it's polished out. And then when I come to restring, I will bear in mind that there is going to be an adjustment with that truss rod adjuster before it goes back to Owen, but with the new strings on. But we'll be kind of the majority, or the precision part of the setup is really done, and that's getting the nut right, getting the tusk nut in place, getting it to the exact right action and so on, which I'll do when I put the new strings on shortly. We'll just tweak the slots just to make sure they're wide enough and free running, and then after that the only thing will be to adjust also do the intonation, and then the final thing off camera when it comes in will be making any adjustment. I want a tiny adjustment to the truss rod, and in a way it's a shame. I what I might do in this video, since I'm not going to do it with this guitar exactly, I might just cover it again with another neck, and just, you know, for the purpose of encouraging you, Owen, particularly, to not be afraid of adjusting it. I was a bit cavalier in the past, and I've said out loud, you know, there's no way you can literally not break, or you would have to struggle really hard to break a truss rod. And in most cases, that's absolutely true. The reason I was saying that is because I was fed up of all these sort of horror stories of techs telling ordinary guitar owners, you know, that you can't possibly adjust, or you should be afraid of adjusting your truss rod because it's going to break. And you know, but I think I was a bit over the top saying it's absolutely no way on earth you can damage it. It turns out that with most modern truss rods, the two-part metal ones, is you would really struggle to break them, because the forces at work when you tension them up are, you know, the metal is acting on the metal. The resultant shape in the change in the shape of the two metal components has some effect on the neck of your the wood of your guitar, but the forces, the heavy forces, are primarily between the two pieces of metal. This isn't the case with older truss rods, and for example, Gibson, probably the classical style still, Gibson and Fender truss rods, where they don't use that modern kind of two-part metallic structure. What they use is a rod, and then they prop that rod effectively against the wood of the neck as the stop, and when you make an adjustment, you are tightening the bolt or the nut on the rod against a sort of groove or a locking point in the wood of the neck, and of course that's putting the neck under direct pressure to basically flatten out a rod to create a change in the shape. That actually does put your neck under a lot of pressure, and excessive cranking on that baby can and will split the maple sometimes, not all the time, but can split the maple to either side of the skunk strip, and you know, so you have to be careful of that. But generally speaking, you really can't do much damage. So I'm going to take a neck here, and I'm going to demonstrate, Owen, what I mean, just so that hopefully you'll get. I won't be able to demonstrate it with I actually don't have a guitar that's not in a box. Have I got a guitar? Oh, I suppose I've got one here. I've got Adams here. Let's see. This is a Fender one, but let's use this. Let's put this out of the way. Let's move this out of the way to somewhere else for a minute. Stay there. Let's put the PRS on the peg. I've got more pegs which I need to put up, but let's get a standard guitar in the middle of this whole thing. So let's tune up and see what we've got. In tune. Okay, so truss rod in this guitar is probably the old Fender style one, which is attached to the wood, and the anchor points are here and here, just inside the heel. There's the other end here, and when you make an adjustment, you are basically trying to pull a curved bar flat, and in doing so you change the shape of the neck. But the point in principle is that when you adjust a truss rod, you are either creating more or less curvature in the neck. So a simple function of the truss rod is as follows. Forget for a minute the method it uses, but when you put your strings on, your neck might go like this, and just imagine your strings are whizzing across like that, down to the bridge, and by default the strings, because they're putting on a load of loading, they tend, may or may not, depending on the construction of the neck, whatever, how strong it is, how thick it is, whether it's got reinforced carbon fibre rods or whatever, or a metal steel strip down the middle, who knows. But either which way, pulling on these strings will tend to bend the wood. And so the truss rod exists primarily as a means to give you control of that bend. All right? Whether it's a bend caused by strings pulling the neck into a curve, or sometimes the strings aren't pulling enough and you need to force the neck to bend in another direction, in which case a two-way truss rod is really useful, one that bends positively in each way you turn it. Now the Fender one doesn't do that. It either tightens or slackens, and so it relies to begin with on the force of the strings bending the neck, and history has shown that it tends to be like that. But it's why you often hear people saying, oh, my neck is permanently relieved even with the strings off. How can I no, actually that's not the right way. I've got a back bow in the neck, and even with the strings on I can't get any more curvature into it. And the problem you've got there with a Fender style truss rod is that you've got no positive way you can bend the shape of the rod any further this way if the strings aren't pulling it. And so people give up and find another neck, or replace the truss rod, pull off the fingerboard and so on. But the truss rod's purpose is to control the bend in your neck. The thing I always say is, people say to me, how much curve or relief is what we call the curvature, curve equals relief, how much relief do you need? And my answer is a tiny bit more than none. There's logic in this, right? It's worth working on the basis that you want as little as you can get away with, but it can't be dead. You don't want it dead flat. Ideally you don't want the neck dead flat, and you certainly don't want it backbowed. So dead flat, not good. You can get away with it and play it. Backbowed, you really can't play it. If you have it backbowed, as you can see, if you have it dead flat, the strings will kind of come away up towards the bridge and you probably just about play it. If you have it backbowed, you'll see that by definition the strings, any fretted strings in this part of the neck will end up choking out in the middle here because it's trying to play over a hump. So we don't want none, we don't want minus, i.e. a back bow. We want some curvature, but we want a tiny bit more than none. So here's how I would measure it, and you can measure it on yours, PRS, any kind of guitar. What you do is you get the guitar on its side like this and you hold down, or you can get a capo if you prefer that. Let's get a capo just to make it look easier. Not a very brilliant capo, but it does the job for this. So we get the capo on and we put the capo on the first fret, and that basically holds the low E against the first fret, and then I hold down the string, same string at the last fret. And what you're looking for is there any gap? So halfway is about the ninth, what have we got, 3, 5, 7, 8th fret, sorry, about 8th fret, halfway between those 2 points. And what you're looking for is there any gap? If there's no gap, if the string is first of all touching in the middle here, but it's actually not touching down there, you've got a bit of back bow. If you are, actually that's not entirely true. Let's put it this bit. If you've got no gap at all, you're either flat or back bowed. You don't want to be either of those. If you're back bowed, you'll notice it because notes played here will be choking already. But you don't want it flat either. So you want it with a tiny gap you can barely see and only barely hear when you tap it down. Now that's clearly got some, and if I look at halfway point on the 8th fret, I can see down there that that's probably about 0.3 of a mil, so it's quite a lot. So I know that there's 0.3 of a millimeter. You can find out how much is on the PRS. You want a tiny bit more than none. So on this guitar I'm going to make an adjustment, and I never quite know which is the one for the Mexican. It's not that one then. What did the Mexican one use? It's probably a new one from my bag of new. Where did I hang it up? Mexican Martin? No. I've just bought a bunch of these and I've hung them somewhere clever. I knew I'd find. There you go. These are my Mexico. I think these should be my Mexico. I went and put things around them so I could see. So let's have a feel. Oh yes, all right, so this is my Mexican. So what we do is, remember we've got about 0.3 of a mil, and I want to demonstrate to you what happens when you remove that, because it's more than we need. So I go clockwise to tighten the rod, which should reduce the action. Now, it's not the longest truss rod in the world, so I can only do small turns. I did about 20 degrees of turn there, and then once you've done that, clockwise to flatten it, I go back here and I check it, and that gap is reduced. So I'm going to take it down to flat and slightly backbowed. If you struggle, you can pull the strings either side, the D and the G to one side, give yourself a little bit more room to get a bigger crank on it, like so. So you can see I'm going now, that's about 30 degrees in one go. I'm going to put the strings back on, so it's loaded like normal. Press down again, no, tiniest gap. So we're almost backbowed, and I'm going to go a little bit further to backbow it. So we remember, tightening flattens it or pushes it into backbow, and that's clockwise as you look down the end here. So it's stiffening up, it takes a bit more force, but you can see that's another 30 degrees. And so I've been able to tell the difference. And now what I'm listening out for, the notes are struggling now in the first half. So I'm going to go one more crank, and you can, as I said, it's not really that much backbowed at the moment, so it may just be that the neck doesn't want to do it, but I'm going to try and backbow it so that we can really hear the difference. And I can't get a good enough reach, so I'm going to do 20 degrees plus another 20 if I can reach and get a good angle on it. Maybe even 30, look at that. Wow, 30 degrees. That's quite a lot of, that should put it into backbow. So you can see how much I've done. And you say, well, have you kept track of it? Here I'm losing the notes now. And that's because this part of the neck now is humped, it's sticking up into the way of the frets in the first half. So up here it'll play okay. So that's too flat. In fact, it's gone beyond flat, it's gone backbowed, and if I hold down the first and the last, there is no gap at all now. I can hear there's no click. So we're now into proper backbow. You could probably see it by looking down the neck, right? So you could say, oh, you've totally messed up your neck relief now, you've ruined your guitar. The interesting thing about this, Owen, and that's why I'm showing you this, is that little change that I've just physically done into the neck by using the truss rod. That little change could happen on its own between the summer and the winter season, right? So the weather alone could change that. So now I'm going to undo and go backwards, and I can go back as far as I like, and it's just scuffing up the plastic of this shape here, and I'm afraid it has to do that. They're not quite long enough to go in unless we go in this end, but we've got a much harder twist of the thing. Can't do it. So we technically would need a slightly longer one to do this, but we can always just file that or sand that back in afterwards. So as you can see, I'm now gently cranking this back. See, I didn't count how many times. I mean, you can keep track of it when you do test adjust your own, but I'm confident that I can come back. Now I've got loads of relief now. Now we don't want this much. And why don't we want this much? We've got some relief. See, those notes are freed up. Well, we don't want that much relief because for the same setting of action, this now feels like a really tall action. So that's one of the downsides of going too far with it. Your tall or your increased relief, you can see it by holding down the first and last fret. You can tap in the middle and see this is now about 0.5 of a mil, if not a bit more. So we've got more relief than we had. but we don't need any more than just the whiff of relief. And if you're trying to adjust yours back to playability after the, say, the winter season's dried it out and caused it to go flat and backbowed, so, oh, we've gone too far, let's now go back and tighten a little bit, and let's kind of home in bit by bit onto a tiny bit more than none, which is what I recommend. So we go back, check, ooh, tiny bit more than none. We could go back until we've got none and then just slack off. We could do it that way, or we could eyeball it like I've done from experience and go, well, that's a tiny bit more than none, that's adequate. Or we can just do a little bit more, like so, and we go, have we got more than none? Or is it still a gap of some sort? Yeah. Now, that's tuning change as a result of all the adjustments. But now I've got pound for pound, the same action here, same action there. Haven't adjusted the nut and I haven't adjusted the saddles, but we've got as little relief as we need, which is a tiny bit more than none. I can see it there, there's a gap, I can hear it clicking, and my notes here play. That's what I call a tiny bit more than none. If I tighten it, it'll disappear. If I slack back, I'm just around the pivoting around the no clearance, tiny bit of clearance. If you aim for a tiny bit more than none, you're in the right place and you can't go wrong. So I recommend you do that with your PRS, and especially if, let's say later on in the year, suddenly you come to pick it up and you go, either, God, the action's changed, it feels like a mile high here. If you haven't touched your saddles or your bridge on your PRS, if you haven't touched that and you haven't done anything to the nut, the only way this guitar is going to change between now and the next season or whatever is if the shape of the neck changes, and it could do, as I said, it can flatten out due to humidity or curve more due to humidity and temperature. And so if anything changes, trust that none of these will have changed without you deliberately doing it. Or sometimes you can, the screws might change if you take the thing off and move the bridge around and or move it about, these can come undone. But more or less, if you just take the strings off, put new ones on, leave it in the case over the period, the changes will be the changes in the shape of the neck, and your job is to control them back to a tiny bit more than none. If it grows too great, and you could, if you're not sure if it's a tiny bit more than none, crank it anyway back to none and then slack back off counterclockwise until it becomes a recognizable tiny bit more than none, and then you know where it's at the right place. It'll be at the smallest amount necessary to have that little bit of space, and it will as a result of that, it will give you the lowest additional height of action here, which is a sort of secondary effect of adjusting the relief curve in your neck. And that's the important thing to remember, that the relief curve, you're adjusting your truss rod, is not where you go to change your guitar's action. Yes, it does make a massive difference. That load of curve I just put into it made it feel really tall here by comparison, so it doesn't take much to change the way it feels. So it does have a secondary effect of changing your guitar's playing action, particularly at the midpoint of the strings around here. But it's not where we go to change the action. We set a default tiny bit more than none for the gauge of strings we've got, and then if we want to change our action, we use the saddles and the nut to get the correct first and last fret action, which is what I've done in this setup on your PRS. And then as a kind of if we change the string gauge, which we'll do on yours, it may be that pulls more relief into the neck because the strings are thicker, the new ones, in which case I will tame it back when the new hex key comes. Final thing I'll do is tame it back to where I want it to be, and you can get hold of one of those things and do it yourself if you haven't got one at home. Okay, so that was a quick detour on adjusting the neck relief. Oh, just putting this in the bathroom. I need a couple more hangers in here, which is good because it goes straight into the plywood. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause while I do all the sanding stuff and come back when I'm ready to refret. Moths. See you in a minute. Okay, back from polishing out the frets and re-crowning and all that stuff. So I'm just going to now get my oil rag, and we're going to put some re-oil the fingerboard, and we're going to fit the new strings, and we'll be intonate, set the action again at the bridge end, because I've taken the bridge off and it's moved. So we need to just double check we've got the action where we want. We'll then do intonation of the strings, some stretching of the strings, and then we'll take it home, and the final adjustment will be at home, which will be the tweak with the truss rod key if necessary. But now we're all experts in making adjustments to the truss rod, and why we make them. It should be straightforward. What was I going to say? I was going to say something else. I can't remember what it is now. Okay, so here we have our bridge, which is moved. So we need to be standing by, ready to make a height adjustment. Shortly, I'll use my biggest, what do you call it, screwdriver thing. Okay. Here are our nice chunky strings. So because this is down tuned, we're going to go with these slightly higher gauge strings. So there's going to be a bit of a little bit of work with the nut files, just to make sure everything's running smoothly. So what I'm doing is, to begin with, I'm just fitting all the strings in here. They will poke out the back like so. I love these bridges. This is slightly different from the one I've got on one of my guitars, but it's I don't know who makes this one. Kind of looks a bit like, it's probably PRS, but it has a look of the Tone Pros bridge. It's a nice chunky thing, and it's engineered in such a way that the arms, the horns of this bridge fit the posts properly. Cheapies never do, and so you get this slop as the bridge tilts forward, and that tends to sort of lose you the break angle that you need. So the cheapies, they might cost 15 quid. In fact, I've got one over there which I was going to fit to one of my guitars, 15 quid looking thing, or 20 quid. Music Lily, I was going to say Tiger Lily, but Music Lily. Okay, so what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to hoik up the D string, and I'm going to put that one through first. So the first thing I'm going to do is get all the actually, I'm just going to leave that fall for a minute. I'm going to get all of these thingies lined up, because it's good to have the holes in the tuner posts lined up so that the strings go straight through. And also what I'll do is I'm just going to double check that these tuner posts are, or the nuts on the tuner posts are done up, because it's quite common that they come undone over a period of time. So I'll give them a box spanner for that. Just a double check. So that was a little bit loose. That's a little bit loose. It's not the end of the world, but you may have a little bit of vibration or rattle if you don't have them tightened. So I'm going to pull the bridge back into place. We're going to push through the string. Now what I'm going to do is, while that's there, let me zoom in. Sorry, you've got absolutely zero view there at all. What a rubbish cameraman. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and demonstrate what I do. So recommendation for stringing up for good tuning is we come all the way through like this, and then I grab the string here at the first fret and pull back one fret, and then the bridge is going to slide off. So that's not so good. So with this one, the first one you do, it's better if you do a little bit of a cheat. So we get this tight, we hold it at the first fret, and I'm going to kind of pull it back and keep it under tension. And then I'm going to do up, and as we come round, keep it all taut, and we go over the loose. So the held string goes over the loose string as it comes round, keeping everything else taut so the bridge stays in place. And keeping it taut, we then hoik up the loose string upwards, and as the thing comes round again, we make the loose string go over the held string. So the held string goes under, and then as we come round it tightens up, and the bridge will now stay in place. Okay, so that's our one that keeps the bridge in place. And we might as well do the G as well at this point. Now sometimes this G, right, this bridge looks like you have to be a little bit fiddly to get the ball to go into its little housing, but So the reason I do this kind of winding is in my experience, it keeps the minimum amount of, damn, I have to switch hands. It keeps the minimum amount of string necessary on the post. So as it comes round, hold it under tension over the loose one, keep holding it under tension, loose one comes round, yank the loose one up, keep it under tension with your finger gymnastics, and send the held one under the loose one as it comes round. Sometimes it will go around almost twice. It's not a problem, but we can cut those extra bits off just there. So as part of the aid towards tuning stability, just a little extra help is to get a standard amount of windings. You absolutely don't need those little knots in there. That will make no difference at all. As I said to you, Owen, when we met, the tuners don't run backwards. The strings, providing you've got these two loops, the strings never slide off, and they only ever have any risk of doing if they are the bare strings, the plain strings. But they can, the tuners don't go backwards, and the strings simply don't fall off. So you don't need those little knots. It'll just make life difficult for you or anybody else that is setting up your guitar, I promise you. So this is my preferred method, and it gives me perfect tuning stability. And when I met Owen, Owen had been playing with the drummer Dave and was heading out, and I was heading in to play another couple of hours with Dave. And you know, I could play. I anecdotally told Owen about a gig I played the week before where, you know, because of the way I take care of the yin and the yang of the old tuning stability, it's absolutely wonderful to be able to play my guitar, you know, in most cases my own homemade guitars, but play them for, you know, an hour and a half set or whatever, look at them, check the tuning at half time, and tweak if necessary, very tiny tweak, and then play for the next hour and a half without it going out of tune. And that is, it's such a great experience that I expect now from my guitars, because I do this. So what I do is, think back to the yin and the yang, I do the nut first. I change the nut for tusk, which I find is a very good, dependable, low friction material. God, this string is huge. It's like a transatlantic cable. So get the nut right, the right material, and cut to the right, first fret action right, and the slots free running. And occasionally, like this, will be a little bit more challenging because it's clearly a much fatter string we're dealing with here. Anyway, so get the nut right first, and then the other half is stretching all of the slack in the strings out of them. And that is such an important thing that very few of us ever do, and I never did properly before I learned why you should. So I will come on to that bit in a minute. So getting those two things, the nut and the slack in your strings, taken care of, and I now have the luxury of guitar being in tune most of the time, and goes into tune easily and stays in tune cooperatively. And it's you know, once you have that, you know, you don't have to worry about your guitar tuning anymore, and it's just a wonderful feeling. Okay, so I'm just going to pull these up here like so, zoom out for a second. Oh, maybe I'll zoom out if I can go the right way. You can go the right way. So I'm just going to give these a sort of yank to seat them. That one's a bit tight. See this pull, this is critical. So that on this bridge, you're going to need to do this first pull to get the ball ends firmly into the little holes, the little docks. If you don't, it won't they won't seat in there, and it will come out as tuning instability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tune up to A and then drop down. So that's tuned to D natural. Relief is good. I'm going to just double check the last fret action. I may need to go down a tiny bit, yep, because it's come up in taking the bridge off. So this is going to go down a little at this end. Wrong screwdriver. Tiny bit above still. Let's check this side. Tiny bit above. So, and 1.5, 1.25. See if this can hear what it's doing. Acoustic. It's not listening. Why is it not listening? It's funny. Normally this is a good acoustic. It can work. But it ain't. Let's just do this one more time. Then so we know we've got the relief at this tension, looks pretty good. We've got the action right down at this end. First fret action is pretty good, but we'll check it in a minute. And what we're going to do now as part of this essential yin and yang is we get the strings and we take each one and we stretch them physically, thumb and forefinger, like this. So the main pressure point is there and there, not on the far ends of the strings, on the surfaces, the nut of the saddle. So we just bend and stretch between thumb and forefinger, and basically you want to do that until there's no more detuning. And once you've got that, in conjunction with the nut, which we have to still adjust with the slot files, but once we've done that, we're going to be stable in tuning. And the problem with the reason it's yin and yang is you can't do half. So in other words, it's no point stretching all the slack out. Well, it's good to do it, but if you stretch all the slack out and do that part of it, but you don't do the let me just plug this in, it's easier. Yeah, you don't do the nut side of things, then you'll never know. It'll still go out of tune and you won't know what it is. So you have to do both of them. Wow. Come on. What do we want? What do we want? We want a D. So that's all detuned basically. All that stretch is what we've just pulled out of it. So if you think that every single string has got this much detuning of slack in it, and that it only takes one of these strings to release 1/100th of that slack each time to put you out of tune. Spoil your experience of playing, then that across all those strings, that detuning could go on forever, and it could be detuning your guitar for months, if not sometimes up to years. When you bend it, it'll go out of tune. When you crank the tremolo, it'll go out of tune. When you hit it hard, it'll go out of tune. So all of that, consider it all as slack stored up in these strings, and your job is every time you change the strings is to wring it all out of the guitar manually. And it seems like a long-winded process, as it is, but do it, because the tuning stability you'll get, providing your nut is also good, will be wonderful. So we're down to C sharp again. So see how much is coming out. Now all that pulling, it's not pulling the slack out of the tuners. That's just coming out of the train of the string. And that will be a big part of what's happening when you won't being able to get it in tune. So, you know, you say to yourself, oh, I'm done, I'm finished. Look, there's a nice D. Oh, look, we're flat again. Not so much, it's leveling out. But every time we can bend more slack out of it, it's not going to come out when you're playing. You tend to find that the plain strings will settle first, and you've got to be careful. Obviously with a 12 and 54 you won't have to be so careful, but okay, so let's do one more. This is now about the fourth or fifth stretch. Let's run it down one more time, and I think we can think of it as stabilized after that. Then we'll check the nut. Once that's done, we'll check the intonation, and once that's done, we'll go home for Saturday night on the sofa. Go home, and this will be done and ready, apart from the truss rod adjustment. It may not even need it technically, so if it doesn't, then obviously, Owen, you can come and get it before then, when suits. But see, we're just slightly flat. You can see it's still some coming out. I'd say we're close. Very nice. Let's just get the files out to double check, and we have our thingies at the same time. So I'm just going to hoik these off the edge. Now the good thing about widening these is going to be we're just going to be able to free up the to make sure the strings run smoothly through there. So it feels a little bit tight, so I'm going to cut backwards to begin with. I just want widening at this stage more than anything else. Okay, let's start where we mean to start with the G. I've run ahead of myself. Right, we'll start with this one, and I can feel it's a little bit tight in the slot, so we'll open this out here with this one, and I'm working backwards so I don't do the action yet. I'm just worrying about the width, so we call it. And I get my 0.3mm target action, which is good. It's there, well, nearly there. So that's the 17, and it's on a 0.3, and I can afford to cut it down a little in height now. And there we go, 0.3. very close. Let's call it quits for a minute. Let's do the B. Okay, take the B. Now this is quite a large gauge set of files. I can't remember. That's not a large gauge. Sorry, it's a 10 gauge set, but you can kind of move them from side to side, and you'll widen the slot out nicely. They're very good at doing that. So even if you don't really need one set for every gauge. That's what I guess I'm trying to say. I'm using the wrong bleeding thing anyway. That's good. That's in the right place. And then on the 10, get the right one. It's a little high. Just off the edge. Here we go. So a mixture of down and widen. Still a bit high. Down and widen. Nice. Spot on. Right, let's get this one. Take this one down a minute off the side. Okay, that one's perfect. That's right on the action where we want it to be, in fact. And I think that nearly almost is too. These are really nice and low. In fact, what are these at? These are more like 0.25. Blimey. Let's go back in time. Let's go back in time. Good. 0.25. Tiny bit down. 13. Widen down. Tidy. And finally. The 46, which is not wide enough, so we'll rock it, Amadeus. One could do with a little bit more. 36. Okay. Let's have a little. plugged in. That's perfectly intonated as it stands. Okay, we're good to go. A little bit of a tiny bit more adjustment, and then and a tweak of the whatchamacallit, and I will be happy. Right, Saturday night. It's gone dark. I'll see you soon. Thank you for watching.